Hello, my name's Sam, and this is a story of how I overcame all possible odds despite life's challenges. It's funny to think back on how differently things were at one point in time and how everything ultimately unfolded. But let's rewind the clock to my formative years. When I was young, I was aware that people came from loving homes with caring families. Being surrounded by friends from such backgrounds made it harder for me to relate to them. I mention this because, well, let's just say, my family wasn't exactly the prettiest. I lived with my alcoholic father in a small house on the outskirts of our neighborhood. My mother had walked out when I was young, leaving me alone with my despicable father. I tried not to have outright contempt for him, but when someone barely scrapes by to make ends meet and is only physically and verbally harsh, some resentment is but natural. Living with my father was certainly difficult, but it never stopped me from socializing or making great friends. What's more is that it never held me back from dreaming big. I was only 6 when I watched Pulp Fiction on home video. Watching Samuel Jackson and John Travolta with their electric presence and charisma awakened something within me, a burning desire to pursue acting. Back then, and even today, it seemed like a foolish dream, but I was a 6-year-old kid in awe of the movies. I became obsessed and determined to light up the silver screen. But the funny thing about life is that it can all come crashing down so quickly. In the blink of an eye, my entire life was upended on a random afternoon. My father had picked me up from school, and we were heading back home in his truck. His continuous coughing, red eyes, and sluggish movement revealed a frightening truth: my father was drunk again. Terrified that he might lash or react harshly, I didn't question him at all. Perhaps I should have said something, for it would have prevented my father from suddenly swerving and crashing into a tree only minutes later. The crash was swift but brutal. All I recall was broken glass and endless pain. Little did I know this minor car crash would alter my life forever. The two of us were rushed to the hospital, and my father survived with minor injuries. But since my seatbelt had been loose and unchecked, I ended up with serious scars all over my face. The doctors tried their best to stitch me up and clean my injuries, but in the end, their hands were tied by the circumstances. As I was wheeled out of the surgery room, my father was missing, and a strange man was speaking to my doctors. He came up to me and introduced himself. "Luke, hey Sam, recognize me?" I was confused as I'd never seen the man before. "I'm your Uncle Luke. You remember I used to come around a couple of times to your house?" Suddenly it clicked: Luke was my father's older brother. We weren't too close with each other, and I remember his rare visits, especially one where things spiraled out of control and he fought with my father. I couldn't help wondering why he was at the hospital though. "Luke, your father went back home, he had some work. He wants you to stay with me for a while." "But he just left? Without a word?" "Luke, I'm afraid so, Sam." There were some ongoing discussions between Luke and the doctors, and I clearly remember the knots in my stomach then. They were debating whether to break some news to me, but nothing could have prepared me for what I was going to learn. The doctors led me to a room and showed me a mirror. I clearly remember the rush of emotions in that single moment: shame, horror, disgust, and disappointment. A senior doctor explained that despite their best efforts, I would be left with permanent facial scars and there was no two ways about it. Traumatized and wondering how I could live life normally again, I was soon discharged from the hospital and went along with Luke to his house. During the bus ride to Luke's house, all I could think about was what lay ahead for me now. How could I ever become an actor with such ugly scars? Who would ever accept me for who I am? A million questions hounded me, and I couldn't stop wondering what my future looked like. Luke helped me settle into his home, and he was a stark contrast to my father. Compared to the alcoholic, abusive, and irresponsible figure my father had been, Luke was calmer, rational, and incredibly supportive. But despite his warm nature, I struggled for years as a result of my facial deformity. From a confident kid who was determined to become a movie star, I was now a frightened teenager, afraid to show my face and terrified of being judged. It was a harsh contrast to what my earlier life had looked like, and I wondered how I'd survive now with these scars. As a few months passed by, it soon dawned upon me that my father was never coming back to get me. Luke even confessed this to me in a heartbreaking moment, stating that my father had left me with him for good. Despite this cruel move of abandonment by my father, I felt a sense of relief to be under Luke's wing. Our limited familiarity aside, Luke was a genuinely kind individual and filled a void of parental love, which my father never seemed to provide. He continued to motivate me despite my scars, but my painful injuries isolated me from everyone I knew. Now that I was settled in Luke's neighborhood, I joined a public school close by, but I suffered endless bullying and torment from the kids there. I was an easy target and endured years of ridicule and humiliation. One girl tried approaching me as a friend, but stopped talking to me after people labeled us as Beauty and the Beast. Honestly, the cruelty during my school and college years knew no bounds. There was a shocking incident in college, which further reinforced my belief that my deformity would always haunt me. My acting ambitions long dead and buried, I'd chosen to pursue advertising in college. Unfortunately, while everyone was introducing themselves on the first day of college, I heard two students yell during my introduction. "Why don't you tell us a creative way to fix that face? How about you advertise a facelift?" The class burst into laughter, and it was at this moment that I believed my scars were inescapable. College nights were often spent crying or wondering why I was this way. Even random pedestrians on the street indulged in cold remarks and judgmental stares. Luke remained the sole anchor in my life, motivating me when nobody else appeared to be in my corner. My father had long abandoned me, and it was heartbreaking to think that the hospital day was the last time I'd ever seen him. Over time, Luke took on the role of my father. He inspired me to pursue my career in advertising, and with his encouragement, I was able to graduate with top honors. After years of bullying and mockery, my academic success made me feel as though I wasn't doomed anymore. I remember how enthusiastically Luke was cheering for me during my graduation ceremony. But I was oblivious to the real-world hurdles I would soon encounter. As I transitioned to adulthood, I bid Luke farewell and moved to the city. Life there was inevitably difficult, and the scars never left. Passerbys watched awkwardly, while others pointed and laughed. But I'd become accustomed to such behavior and was indifferent to this. I had applied to a small advertising firm and was awaiting their response. A week later, there was an interview scheduled with the firm's HR manager. I was a bundle of nerves and wasn't expecting much. An older man named Christopher greeted me as I stepped into the interview room. There was a younger person next to him, presumably his assistant. "Hello, Sam, my name's Christopher. I'm the hiring manager here. This is my assistant, Gary. Please take a seat." Racked with anxiety, I had no idea how the interview would unfold. To my surprise, things went pleasantly. Neither Christopher nor Gary once commented on my scars, nor seemed visibly uncomfortable with them. In fact, Christopher appreciated my optimism and cheerful demeanor, and as we conversed for a bit, he offered me an immediate position. "Typically, we assign junior roles to newbies, but your portfolio is excellent, Sam. These scores, your personal projects... I'm honestly amazed. To be clear, you will be starting in a junior role, but I think our stellar creative team would be a perfect fit for you." Christopher's generosity and recognition touched my heart. Clearly, he'd taken a liking to me, and his encouragement meant the world to me. The fact that he saw potential and assigned me to a stellar team already excited me about my future at the firm. I heard back from the team a few days later regarding the offer letter and geared up for my first day at the office. Unfortunately, I had no clue what a colossal disaster that day would shape up to be. On my first day at the firm, I arrived with an eager mind and a great set of expectations. This is the start of your life, I told myself, convinced that I was embarking on a transformative journey. Christopher welcomed me at the firm and led me to a large room, bustling with activity. People were roaming around, sharing notes, adding items to soft boards, etc. It felt like such a creatively enriching space that is until disaster struck only moments later. A short man, possibly a few years older to me, stormed into the room. He looked annoyed and frustrated, as if he were ready to pick someone apart. To my horror, I was his target, and the man was Barry. He was none other than my boss. Within seconds, the room fell silent and Barry prepared to address them. Before he could, however, his eyes fell on me. He let out an audible gasp and everyone turned in my direction. The sudden spotlight felt suffocating. "Who on earth are you? Who let him in here?" Murmurs filled the room and my face went red with shame. Luckily, Christopher stepped up to defend me. "Sir, this is Sam. He's the new recruit for the creative team. It's his first day. I showed you his portfolio last week." "Yeah, I remember, I guess. But you never told me this is what he looked like." "Sir, I don't see how his appearance is relevant to his talent. This is an advertising firm, Christopher. We hire smart, creative people, not some ugly monster. I'm demoting him this instant. Assign him to social media or whatever." "Sir, but that would be a criminal waste of this young man's talent. You're making a mistake." I'm making a mistake. You accuse me of a mistake. That's it, Christopher. I've been keeping you here long enough. Pack your things and get out. You're fired." Everyone in the room burst into whispers. Overcome with guilt and devastation, I stared at both Christopher and Barry. Christopher quietly walked out, surrendering defeat. Barry gave me a cold, hard stare. "What are you waiting for, Frankenstein's monster? Get out of here." Others in the room laughed at Barry's remark while I chased after Christopher. I felt 18 again, surrounded by college bullies, helpless and alone. Outside the room, Christopher smiled once he saw me running after him. "Don't beat yourself up, Sam. That wasn't your fault, not in the slightest. Some people are just really cruel. Hang in there and you'll be fine. I'll see you around and never forget you're mighty talented." Christopher departed after those words, leaving me with a profound mix of feelings. The one person who'd been kind to me in the city had just been fired because of me. I was unaware that Barry was my boss and could hardly believe he uttered those horrible words. Uglymonster.it lingered in my mind throughout the entire day. But as they say, there's no rest for the weary. Minutes after Christopher's dismissal, another employee guided me to the job I would now be doing, drafting Excel sheets in the HR department. What was supposed to be a creatively fulfilling career had now devolved into a lowly corporate job. It was exhausting, managing Excel sheets and records all day with zero creativity. Any attempt to join the strategy or creative teams was shut down by Barry. He refused to even grant me an audience, stating that he didn't even wish to go eye to eye with an ugly creature like me. Weeks passed by and life reached a point of mundanity. The firm was always filled with people on the move, and nobody seemed remotely interested in giving me a chance. With Barry's refusal to see me, my job dissatisfaction only mounted. Filling in Excel sheets all day was a tedious affair, and I wondered how much more of this could I take. But just when I figured my future at the firm was doomed, an opportunity arose most unexpectedly. It was a weekend and I was finishing up filing some records. All the employees were leaving for the day. Suddenly, Andrew, one of my coworkers, approached my desk with a folder. "Hey, you're the new guy, right? The monster dude?" My face sank at that comment. "Is that how everyone thought of me?" "Yep, that's me. What do you need?" "So, Barry dumped some work on me last minute, but I'm late for dinner and I need you to cover up for me. How good are you at designing?" "I'm fairly good at it. We had multiple design projects at college." "Okay, great. Here's a folder of the tentative designs our client's looking for. I'll email you the other details. You're a lifesaver." Andrew rushed out of the office like his life depended on it. I sat with the folder, contemplating what had just happened. Should I have accepted the extra workload, or was this a golden opportunity in disguise? I'd spent too much time cooped up in the HR office sorting paperwork, and finally receiving some creative work felt like a dream come true. Once I finished filing the records, I jumped to work on the designs. I was up all night, exhausting every last creative cell in my body whilst coming up with the designs. It took me hours, and finally, the sample designs were ready by morning. I emailed them to Andrew, eager to hear his response on the designs. As I entered the firm early in the morning and became occupied with my filing work, I noticed Andrew walk into Barry's cabin. A few minutes later, they stepped out and Barry looked happier than I'd ever seen him before. They walked past my office with Barry muttering, "These are excellent, Andrew. I've never seen anything like it." "Thank you, sir." Deep down, I was gravely disappointed. It was crushing to watch Andrew so easily grab the credit for my work. Hours of my creative work appeared futile, given how impressed Barry was with Andrew instead. However, I found solace in the fact that everyone in the creative team loved the designs. The client adored them as well, and I honestly couldn't be any happier. But the real problem emerged when I approached Andrew later that day. "Hey, I heard everyone loved the designs." "Oh yeah, it was great stuff." "Do you think we can tell Barry about it? That I came up with the designs? Or could we work something out?" "Hey, it was a one-time thing, okay? Stop bothering me." Andrew stormed away, and I stood there, wondering why I'd expected anything else. I'd agreed to take up his work for him, and I suppose asking for my fair share of credit might appear unreasonable in this situation. But the biggest blow was yet to come. A week after the successful designs, I was still stuck in HR, carrying out mundane tasks each day. I wondered whether I'd ever be given a chance with the creative team in a legitimate role. While walking into the office on an unassuming day, an outrageous revelation awaited me. Everyone was preoccupied with work, but the creative team was having internal discussions. As I walked past the creative room, I overheard and caught a detail that shook me. The entire creative team had received performance bonuses for their recent work with a client, and Andrew had received an especially generous bonus. Shattered by this, I took Andrew to a corner and decided to have a conversation about it. Andrew, this is messed up. Yes, it was a one-time thing, but receiving a bonus more than the entire team is a bit too much. What are you going to do about it? Complained to Barry. Hope he listens to you. You know, calls you the Loch Ness Monster? He shoved me aside and walked away. My mind raced with two options. Should I take my chances and confess to Barry, or should I let it go and wait for a future opportunity? Deciding that I wanted to stand up for myself and my work, I approached Barry despite my reluctance. But I was unaware that I was stepping into a trap. Barry was busy in his office during the afternoons, and I politely knocked on his door and walked in. Well, look what the cat dragged in. What do you want? Sir, I'm afraid I have a confession to make. Then get on with it. I haven't got all day. Sir, those designs for the client campaign last week, the ones you loved, it was designed by you, wasn't it? I was completely caught off guard. Sir, how did you do? Because Andrew told me about it up front, and I couldn't be less bothered. The credit remains his. How can you do this, sir? I'm the creative director and your boss. I can do whatever I want. If I decide Andrew gets the bonus plus the credit, that's my decision. Besides, we don't hand bonuses to ugly beasts. Now get out of my office. Cursing myself for confiding in Barry, I stepped out of his office with a deep sense of shame and embarrassment. Expecting support from someone who viewed me as a monster was just naive. Years spent trying to overcome my insecurity felt useless, as Barry's harshness only reopened old wounds. The fact that Andrew had seized both the credit and the bonus for my work, with Barry's approval, deeply upset me. Was I stuck at this firm with the awful credit-stealing duo of Barry and Andrew? Was there genuinely no hope? While justice itself was a long road ahead, a strange incident in the following weeks changed everything I'd known about Barry. While the other employees had their weekly off, Barry called me on a Sunday to finish up some paperwork. He piled it onto me and asked me to work overtime to finish it up. Oh, and when you're done with those papers, keep them on my desk. I'll see you on Monday. Barry cheerily exited the building, leaving me alone in the entire office. Finishing the paperwork was a grueling procedure, and I dumped it all onto Barry's desk when I was done. However, I noticed something while leaving his office. There was a drawer behind Barry's desk marked confidential with a key attached to it. Curious, I pulled it open but had no idea that the contents of that drawer would change everything. It was filled with a few dusty files and looked like some employee records. Why were these locked here and not with the HR department? I was about to find out. A quick glance through the files revealed a horrifying truth. They were all complaints registered against Barry for misconduct and inappropriateness against female employees. Filled with copies of emails and messages, the complaints were damning and downright shocking. Unsure of what to do with such significant information, I made a risky decision. I decided to secretly print out copies of the files and store them with me in the HR office. I would have to study all of it in detail to unravel the web of Barry's hidden past with former employees. I could hardly even sleep at home that night, torn between confronting Barry and waiting for the right moment to deliver justice. It was also during this time when I first met Hannah. Whilst grabbing breakfast at a diner once, I noticed her sitting in a corner booth. What first struck me was that she also had a scar across her face. As I ate my food in silence, I saw her glancing towards me too. When the two of us caught each other's eyes, we couldn't help smiling. I was too nervous to approach her, but Hannah made the first move by coming over to my table. Nice seeing another Al Pacino in here. Al Pacino? What do you mean? You know, Scarface. I laughed at her comment. What's your name? I'm Sam. What's yours? I'm Hannah. Nice to meet you. Hannah had this easy humor and infectious energy to her. She took a seat across from me and we started talking about the origin of our facial scars. She'd gotten hers during childhood as well. Her older brother had played a cruel prank on her, leaving her with permanent scars. Despite our first meeting, the two of us were empathetic and open. Conversations with her were free-flowing and calming. In a world where I'd been continually ostracized and picked upon, here was someone who understood my pain and extended love and support. Hannah and I spoke for an hour at the diner and I almost missed work that day. We exchanged numbers and planned to catch up soon. If I'd only known who she really was. My days at the firm were spent in the HR office, excluded from all creative decisions. Each day I thought of how I could use the confidential files to expose Barry and bring justice to his victims. Did Andrew know about this? Did he also play a role in suppressing the voices of the wronged employees? The dilemma weighed heavy on my mind for the longest time. Feeling isolated at the firm, I found solace in Hannah's companionship. Her company became the only thing to look forward to. After a few months of working at the firm, I was finally taken out of HR and given the role of a junior copywriter. I had little say in the matter. Since it was a small firm, I suppose Barry had no alternative except to move me to the creative team. I was grateful for the shift but remained largely excluded from all creative decisions, each one overridden by Barry. I felt awful for not bringing Barry's injustices to light, even more so when I already had evidence for the same. Fearing how Barry had condoned Andrew's credit stealing, I had no idea what he'd do if he knew I'd made copies of the confidential documents. On one hand, the fear of losing my job lingered in my mind, but on the other hand, all I could think about was exposing Barry for the sleazy figure he was. But as life would have it, justice would arrive later in the most unexpected of ways. As time flew by, Hannah and I became even closer. I shared everything with her, including the car crash from my past, my life with Luke, my experiences at college, all of it. It was freeing to be so open with her and be transparent about my fears, my insecurities, everything. Hannah told me that she worked as a creative consultant at a large firm. Excited after hearing this, I shared my experiences at the firm with her and how difficult life was under Barry. The very mention of Barry and my firm lit something up in her eyes. It was like this flash of recognition. My mind wandered to a frightening possibility. Had Hannah been one of Barry's former victims? Someone who wasn't mentioned in his files? This possibility was on my mind for quite a while. I could hardly even focus on work any longer. Barry's cruel remarks were endless. I'd be busy at my desk and he'd stroll by and quip, "Ah, the monster's hard at work. Maybe ugly beasts can work too if you toss them a bone. Just stay out of my sight though." It pained me each time he remarked such things, and I clenched my jaw and let it go each time. But an explosive day awaited me. Barry had organized an extravagant office party to celebrate the firm's growing success. A week before the party, he made an announcement. Naturally, he attributed the firm's success all to himself and minimized everyone's efforts. While he made the announcement, his gaze shifted to me, and he burst out laughing. I thought of not inviting this monster, but I figured why deprive ourselves of some entertainment at the party? Instead of Beauty and the Beast, he'll probably bring another female beast with him. But I doubt someone can beat this champ in looks. There was murmuring and giggling among the employees. I wish I could have vanished into thin air at that moment. I was seething with rage. Hey, it's a +1 party, so if you're getting a date, make sure it's someone decent. If it's someone uglier than you, then God help us all. Laughter filled the room and I walked out, overwhelmed and unable to bear the mockery. Later that day, I visited Hannah at the diner we'd first met. Curious to hear if she'd accept the party proposal, I asked her outright. "The firm has an office party next week and we can get a +1 with us, and I was thinking, that you want me to come along?" "Yeah, I mean, since we're dating?" "Wait, are we?" "Well, you're an amazing person, Sam, and we've known each other for months. So I'm ready when you are." She laughed heartily and my heart filled up with joy. I'd been too nervous to ask Hannah out, but the fact that she was interested and waiting for me to officiate things. It was an incredible feeling. However, this was the least surprising thing. All evening I was in for plenty of shocks and revelations. As Hannah and I talked enthusiastically, another woman entered the diner and sat in a nearby booth. At first I didn't recognize her, but on a closer look, it was unmistakable. I'd seen her in one of Barry's confidential files. It had her photographs and I distinctly remembered who she was now. The woman's name was Grace, and she'd been one of Barry's victims. Determined not to alarm her, I excused myself from Hannah and approached Grace calmly, eager to explain who I was. "Hey, you're Grace, aren't you?" "Yes, that's me. Do I know you?" "My name's Sam. I work at an advertising firm a couple of miles from here. I guess you worked there. Did you know someone called Barry?" Grace's face fell instantly. She became suddenly conscious and asked me who I was. I explained the situation to her and how I'd stumbled across the confidential records. "It's hopeless, Sam. Barry wields too much influence. I had to quit my job, and it's been a struggle since he knows all the major players in advertising and put in a bad name for me. But I've got the files. I've got evidence. It's a long shot, Sam, and we might not win. We'll be ruined. I wouldn't be so sure of that. Hannah confessed that she'd heard everything. She turned to me with a strange look. Listen, Sam, I can help you out here. The thing is, I know Barry. What? Why didn't you tell me this before? I'm sorry. I was afraid to tell you earlier. Well, how do you know him? Hannah hesitated. Sam, please trust me on this. I'll tell you soon, but if you plan to take Barry down, I can be of great help. What are you talking about, Hannah? How will you plan things out if we don't know how you're connected to Barry? Why won't you tell me? Sam, I'll have a word with Grace. You can hand over the evidence tomorrow and it'll be taken care of. My head was bursting with questions. Mainly, I was taken aback by Hannah's revelation. I had a nagging feeling for the longest time each time I mentioned Barry, but Hannah's confirmation only prompted more. Questions: what else was she hiding? Was she truly a victim of Barry's, or was something else at play? Hannah's refusal to answer anything only added to the intrigue of her true identity. The answer, as I'd learn a week later at the office party, would blow my mind. I handed the evidence to Hannah and Grace the next day, cautioning them to act carefully. However, I noticed Grace seemed much more optimistic than she was at the diner, and I wondered what Hannah had told her. Maintaining a low profile at the firm, I anxiously waited as a week passed by. The office party drew closer and my nervousness only skyrocketed. Hannah and Grace had kept me in the dark regarding their intricate plan. I knew we were trying to take down Barry, but Hannah's connection to him puzzled me in the days leading up to the party. Little did I know the event was going to be anything but celebratory. On the day of the party, I was already running late. But things were made worse by a sudden phone call from Barry. Hey, is this the monster's cell phone? It's Sam, sir. Oh, thank God. Listen, I need a favor. Visit the cleaners downtown and collect my suit for the party. I'll share the name with you. I'm sure you're just getting ready to look uglier and more horrific than usual. Don't be late. Frustrated, I picked up Barry's expensive suit from the cleaners and then picked up Hannah in a rented car before the party. We had to strategize and give Grace a lift as well. As I waited outside Hannah's home, I was flabbergasted. It was a massive and sprawling home. Hannah stepped out and started walking towards the car. Words simply fell short. She looked breathtaking. I struggled for adequate compliments and Hannah smiled and hugged me. The two of us got into the car and I drove away. However, the silence felt uncomfortable and I decided to break the ice. Listen, I've been meaning to ask you, Hannah. Frankly, the suspense is killing me at this point. How are you related to Barry? Just be patient, Sam. We're almost reaching the party. You'll see. After what felt like an excruciating build-up to an uncomfortable party, the moment of truth was finally here. As I parked my car near the office entrance, I noticed Barry outside with a few other employees who were late too. With my heart beating rapidly in my chest, I got out of the car and walked towards the entrance. Barry's eyes caught a hold of me and he instantly flashed a twisted smile. Couldn't find a plus one, huh? The other employees began giggling. Barry's usual bullying routine made me sick to my stomach at this point, but I had to remain patient since our revenge was yet to come. I bet his girlfriend is a disgustingly overweight woman. Did you find another monster, uglier than you? The employees began laughing at this point, but everyone fell silent as Hannah stepped out of the car. But Barry, it's almost as if something possessed him at that moment. He began shaking with fear and anxiety, suddenly running out of breath. Looking back and forth between Hannah and me, his face went white as a sheet, as if he'd seen a ghost. He finally uttered a sentence that would be forever etched in my mind. You're dating my sister. Shocking, couldn't even begin to describe the magnitude of emotions I felt at that moment. I knew Barry and Hannah had a deeper connection, but to think they were siblings was utterly baffling. The employees gasped and Barry froze in his place. I'd never seen him this way. It was as though he'd switched from a cruel bully to a timid child. Hannah approached him, armed with a confident smile. Hi, Barry. Been a long time since I've seen you. While Barry still grappled with her presence, Hannah looked at me apologetically. Hearing the commotion, the employees in the office rushed outside. I'm so sorry, Sam. I didn't want to tell you until I met him face to face. You know the older brother who left me with a scar? It was Barry. He ruined my life. But that ends today. Just when I thought I couldn't hate Barry any more than I already did, this revelation changed everything. To think that Barry wasn't just responsible for my suffering but had inflicted pain upon the woman I loved. I couldn't wait to take him down. "You can come out now, Grace." Grace stepped out of the back seat of my car. Barry almost fainted at the sight of her. He was still registering the shock from Hannah, and now Grace's presence left him speechless. "I'm sure you remember her, Barry." Andrew suddenly emerged from behind Barry. He scoffed at the sight of Grace. "Look who's back from the dead. Didn't we cut you loose? I'm here to make you suffer for what you did. Both of you. The boss and his sleazy, pathetic accomplice. What proof do you even have?" I couldn't stop smiling. It had all worked out perfectly. Barry and Andrew seemed alarmed at my smile. They realized something was up. Finally, Hannah pulled out copies of the evidence from her purse. "I'm sure you recognize these, Barry. It's records and records of evidence about your misconduct. Not just mine, but dozens of other ex-employees." Barry and Andrew were too stunned to speak, like two criminals who'd been caught in the act. Guess it wasn't a good idea to force me into HR, was it? All the employees began murmuring as Barry struggled to make sense of the situation. "Her claims are useless. This won't work, it can't." Barry turned to him with a broken face. Defeat was clear. "You don't understand, Andrew. She's a majority stakeholder in the firm. She can pull the plug anytime she likes." "I'm not pulling the plug. But I'm making some changes, starting with Sam in his new position as the creative director." "Barry, Andrew, you're fired. These documents will be leaked to the board and the press tomorrow. Have a great party. You'll finally suffer for your actions, you pathetic man." Grace tossed Barry's expensive suit at his feet. The party was thrown into chaos. Barry and Andrew struggled to calm the employees, who all burst into rage and questions. An intense fear overcame Barry, a kind I'd never seen before. His act was up, and he was cornered with nowhere to go. Hannah held my hand, and the two of us walked back to the car with Grace. The evening had been filled with jaw-dropping truths and twists, but nothing was more fulfilling than the fact that justice had been delivered.